And when you look at John, he's not just managing people, he's a leader, right? He's that person where through his words and actions you want to follow, but in yet such a approachable way, in such a humble way. So when we think of leadership and what kind of leader do you want to be in your respective communities, I think how lucky was I that I could see someone like John in my life. To see, he was this person who spoke to presidents and advised things on the world affairs. And yet he always made time for people. He always made you feel that you were important, that the issues or concerns you have are important. And he always made the time. Maybe we were lucky that we're at the tail end of his career. I don't know, but there's a part of me that when I look at all the organizations that he worked on, that part was true. I mean, I'm sure John at age 12 versus John at age, 70, just had this love of life, this passion to help others.
And and so I did the only thing I thought would be a smart thing to do, which is I went to John and I said, John, I've got all these mentors in my life and they've been great. And I said, I really appreciate the feedback you gave me and it's really meaningful to me and I need you to mentor me. Will you mentor me? And I invited him out to lunch at the faculty club and John looked across the table and said, no. I was like, wait. This,
not the right answer.
This is not the way this is supposed to go. I'm a Gardner Fellow. Do you not understand? And you recommended me for this thing and told me I'm carrying your name and brand, and now you're saying you won't even mentor me? Is it that bad? And he said something to me, which again I've carried through and have always passed along, which is he said, I don't mentor. I said, John, you're known as the greatest mentor in the world. How could you not mentor? He said, I only co-mentor.
Co-mentor.
And I said, what does that mean? I've never heard that. And he said, I have 2 or 3 things I want to learn from you. And he said, I want to have an explicit agreement that we're going to have an exchange around these things, and I will help you with those things if you help me with these things. And so, we did all that, and it was another important lesson to me. So I again, steal from John. Every time somebody younger comes to me and says, will you mentor me? I say no. And then I do the rest of it. And by the way, I think it's the best thing. John was immensely smart and a genius about human relations.
Yes.
And he understood that one-way relationships don't work. And so that was, again, his way of establishing that this was a relationship, not a transmission. And, again, huge lesson wrapped in a little, in a big lesson wrapped in a very practical application.
Yeah.
And again, all about people and how you treat them.
Mm-hmm. His wisdom came from being a real person. Mm-hmm. And I think that humility, where in a sense I didn't realize what a great man he was because he was a man, and that's who he revealed himself to be. Someone who came home from the war and didn't know what he was going to do and kind of tried plan B and went off this way. So I think, that he was just, very warm and wise. Mm-hmm. And I think anyone who had a chance to know him, I think his organizations speak for themselves. I mean, when I think about, and I don't remember specifics of my mom and dad and Common Cause, and you think, there are 2 people on the West Coast, right? I mean, so far from that place, mm-hmm. being influenced by that.
Oh, yeah.
This reminds me of one more story about John I'll tell, and then we'll end. He told me once about how he knew that Richard Nixon was going to resign before he actually resigned, because he was working in the White House at the time, I guess, or at least was frequented the White House. And there was a White House librarian whom he'd become very friendly with. And he would visit her regularly, and of course he would get books, and she would recommend books, and they had a kind of significant, relationship. And he went down to visit her, and she told John that, certain books had been called up by Nixon and his team, in preparation for his resignation speech that made clear that he was, in fact, going to resign, and that he'd gotten his heads up as a result of it. And, one, of course, a little interesting footnote to history, but also, in keeping with that kind of impression of him as somebody who kind of built relationships up and down the food chain, not just at the top of the food chain.
Absolutely.